Good morning, all. As you heard, my name is Ali Mohamed. I am a senior advisor to His Excellency President William Ruto and the Special Climate Change Envoy. My apologies, I was supposed to be here much earlier, but because of exigencies of work, I couldn't make it in time, but nonetheless, I am here now. Let me begin by thanking the organizers for inviting me to meet with the Editors Guild from across the continent. It's really a great privilege. You are the people who inform all of us about what's happening in the continent and in the world indeed. You do a marvelous job trying to relay messages, both the challenging ones and the good ones and the other ones as well. So you play a critical role, and it's indeed important that we continue engaging with yourselves to present the important issues of the continent. Climate change, as I'm sure you all have been covering and you are aware of, is the main issue of the world today. Our continent and indeed the entire world is suffering because of the changes that is happening because of human influence in the climate systems of the world. And it's having very serious impact in lives, in livelihoods, and in all our economies. And the manner in which we present and cover, of course, has implication on the responses and the actions that we take. I don't think it is anything necessary for me to emphasize that the continent of Africa is the most impacted by the effects of the adverse extreme weather events. You are now in Nairobi. For those of you who are not coming from the Horn of Africa region, the last 2.5 years of 5 consecutive rainy seasons, we missed our usual seasons, and we've gone through one of the worst drought situations. Nairobi now is very green, but a month or so ago, it wasn't like this. And beyond Nairobi, we have hundreds of thousands of families who have lost their livelihoods and are now more impoverished. So the figures, of course, we will have the exact figures, but over that period, we lost 2.6 million heads of livestock. Now, heads of livestock are just a figure, but that 2.6 million heads of livestock was feeding and was the wealth and livelihood of hundreds of thousands of people who today don't have anything else to rely on. So what happens to them? They come to urban centers, eke life, and the basic thing that they can do, of course, is to, one, wait for aid that is coming from development partners and agencies, UN agencies and civil societies, but also try to go back to nature to see what they can do. So go out and cut firewood, go out there and make charcoal maybe, and maybe offer their labor if there is an opportunity to do some, odd types of jobs.
Recording in progress.
So that is the reality. For Kenya, as many of you will know, we pride ourselves to have some of the best wildlife sanctuaries and parks in the world. Unfortunately, during this severe drought, many of our famed wildlife were lost. In excess of 200 heads of elephants died, this time not to poaching, but to weather impacts. And thousands of the habitats and so forth. In fact, for the first time, from what we know, we started tracking water inside the parks, not to people, but to the wildlife. So that is how significant and challenging issues of climate change is. I think last week, on Thursday, I think it was, our Minister for Finance was reading the budget of Kenya, and he underscored the impact the climate change has had on the growth of our economy. We reduced from about 7.6 or thereabout the previous year to below 5% growth last year. And the story of Kenya is also the story of the rest of Africa, and of course several of the other developing countries of the world. So climate change is a real issue that is impacting us. So for Africa, we've always had a very strong voice when it comes to matters of climate change. You will probably be aware, at the head of state and governments, there is a committee that was set up some years back, around 2014, I suppose, that is called Committee of Heads of State and Government on Climate Change. In short, it's called CAHOSC. Every 2 years, there's a head of state from the continent that has been chairing that committee. This season, it is the turn of the government, His Excellency, the head of state of Kenya, to chair it. And so President William Ruto is currently the chair of the Committee of African Heads of State and Government. Below the heads of state level, we have the African Ministers of Environment. In short, it's called AMCEN, African Ministerial Conference on Environment. Again, that is at ministerial level to discuss matters of climate change and the broader environmental issues of the continent and the world. And below that, we have an active group that I suppose you all are aware, called African Group of Negotiators. They are called AGN. And again, it rotates between regions. This last 2 years, including this year, it was the region of Southern Africa, the term of Southern Africa to lead us in the negotiations. And in Southern Africa, it went to Zambia. And so Zambia, both at ministerial level and at technical level, have been leading the continent in the negotiations. But that's not to say it's just Zambia. There are a lot of other experts, some of them I see here. Fatuma was leading the matters of mitigation and subsidiary bodies on implementation is here, and maybe there are others who have not noticed. So we have head of state level, ministerial level, and technical level on matters of coordinating climate change. Despite that, of course, our voice, while significant and generally coordinated, because we have always been speaking with one voice, thankfully, despite us being one of the largest grouping in the negotiations. We are 54, 55, but we have always been speaking with one voice. But our voice, of course, sometimes is not strong enough because all the world is speaking. And so the chairman of the Committee of African Heads of State and Government, His Excellency President William Ruto, whilst speaking for the continent during the COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh last year, said he's going to convene the first ever Africa Climate Summit. And this is one, of course, to elevate and to enhance the voice of the continent on matters of climate change, but importantly also to look at the specific concerns that our continent has, and more importantly, to look at what contribution our continent is able to make towards the global challenge that is an existential challenge to the entire world. So the first ever climate summit will be held in Nairobi from 4 to 6. It has been endorsed by the African Union Assembly in the last session in Addis Ababa early this year, and now it is an AU endorsed summit hosted by Kenya as the chair of the African Heads of State. What is the expectations of this summit? One, we want to try and see to what extent we can improve on the narrative that Africa has been sending out there on matters of climate change. we do emphasize, and legitimately so, oftentimes, the limited contribution that Africa has to the whole challenge of greenhouse gas accumulation. As you will probably be aware, today the greenhouse gas accumulation has exceeded 420 parts per million. I think the figure is around 425, and still increasing. And the monitoring institutions around the world that continues to monitor on a daily basis, this is almost 1.5 times what it was pre-industrial time when the recording started. It was about 280, so it's 280 parts per million. Now it's at 425, so it's increasing. The contribution therein from us as the continent of Africa is insignificant. The percentages, of course, there are different methodologies of assessing what is the actual contribution from different sectors, but the reality is it's just about 4%. And much of it comes from a few of the industrial, more developed countries of the continent. In fact, 75% of the greenhouse gases contributed by the continent comes from just 4 countries, and I suppose you can, you probably know which will be these 4 countries. The rest of us, minus those 4 countries, will contribute 25%. So 25% of 4% of the globe is just so little. So that has been our emphasis, the contribution that we've been making to end the impact. So that is well and good, but we haven't really focused on the possibilities that we have to contribute to the world addressing this existential challenge for the world. How? Because we are endowed with massive opportunities and massive resources that, if tapped well, can not only help our continent develop in a climate compatible, nature compatible path and trajectory, but also contribute to the whole agenda that we have signed up to in the world of the Paris Agreement goal of reducing the carbon accumulation